Thank you so much for joining me, Professor Turchin. It's really an honor to meet you.
It's a pleasure. And let's use first names, please.
Absolutely. Please call me Scott.
Sounds good.
Peter. So I've written a book called How Life Got This Way, and it's structured by powers of 10 years. So I'm very interested in talking to you as an expert in what I call chapters 1 through 4, from the last few decades to the last few 10,000 years. And I'm very interested in getting your input and your participation, not only as an academic in those time scales, but also as a successful author of general audience books.
Okay.
So your perspective is going to be highly valuable for me and for this book. I really, really appreciate it. And I'd like to begin and prioritize our discussion of research and writing in general.
Okay.
So let me start out by asking you the big question, which is, why should we care about events that happened hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years ago? And we live in a very large world as it is today. Isn't there enough to deal with in the present?
Yeah, well, the view that we don't care about the past is often goes by the name of short-termism. But in order for us to understand our society, we need to understand how these societies have evolved. So let's assume that we share, and I think 99.9% of the humanity shares the view that we want to have very broadly based increases in the well-being. And well-being is not just economic, but social and informational and many other dimensions of it. So how do we achieve that? Well, humanity has learned that to achieve good outcomes, we need to cooperate. But cooperation is a huge puzzle. So in fact, we still don't understand why humans are capable under certain conditions for cooperating on very large scales, social scales. So this is, to me, that's the most important question of social science. It is how cooperation evolved, and also how we can get it to work better, so we can use it for the purpose of increasing broadly based well-being. Right, and so for that we need to go back tens and hundreds of thousands of years ago.
So you feel that in order to sort of harness cooperation today, we kind of need a better understanding of the nature of this beast, and
Exactly.
and that will be accomplished by understanding the circumstances under which cooperation came about.
Yes. Furthermore, cultural evolution has resulted in different human groups using somewhat different institutional and organizational ways to cooperate in large scales, which is why some people who don't speak the same language often find it difficult, or even belong to different cultures, they find it difficult to concert cooperation. So we need to understand more recent history, the history of societies as they evolved over the past human generations, maybe centuries, right? So that we can understand how cooperation is done in the United States compared to Germany or China or whatever. So that's the temporal scale is also important. And finally,
Yes.
we need to understand what's been happening to our societies on the time scale of years and decades. So I wrote another book called Ages of Discord. So we know that all complex human societies go into these integrative, disintegrative phases with periods of about a couple hundred years, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. So, for example, United States right now in what we technically can call a revolutionary situation, all right, which is a heightened instability and possibility of a very dramatic social breakdown. But this condition has developed over the past 30 or 40 years. And therefore, that's why. So, just to sum up, we need to look at a multi-scale perspective. We need to know where we came from on the scale of decades, on the scale of centuries, and on the scale of tens of thousands of years.
There's something to learn at every scale.
Yes.
So let's suppose that someone is interested in learning more. In this Google age, what place is there still for authors and books? Isn't it possible for anyone to find all the answers at their fingertips?
You know, this reminds me of a science fiction novel in which the main character is trying to get, it's a society where everything is credentials, and credentials, basically all information is pumped into your brain directly. And this person actually starts, before the information is pumped into his brain, he actually tries to understand it himself, all right? And then he's very depressed when he is actually rejected for whatever, trade he wanted to gain. But eventually it turns out that he's been selected to be one of the people who create knowledge. Okay? Because he's the one who has the inquiring mind and so on and so forth. So to turn the long story short, where does all that information on Google come from? Well, it comes from research by people like ourselves, and therefore we need to continue that, because otherwise we will not get new knowledge, no new insights. Certainly, Google has no idea about why the United States is now in a revolutionary situation unless they look to the articles and books by people within the field of cliodynamics who have been studying these processes.
As someone who's both an academic and an author, I'd like to get your take on specialists versus generalists. It seems to me that academics, and as a caveat, I am not one, but academics, those who advance the frontiers of knowledge, are almost always ultra specialists. The benefits of specialization are obvious to me, but I wonder if there might be some drawbacks or limitations for academics to have such a focus on specialization. Is there something that we can get from generalist studies, and how can they fit into today's academic environment?
Just as different people specialize in different narrow fields, we also need specialization between generalists and specialists. If everybody was a generalist, then we would not have the benefit of all data, for example, or development of modeling methodologies or analytics in statistics, and things like that. So there is no need for everybody to be a generalist. In fact, there is only a need for a small proportion of people to do that. Having said that, it helps. I think it would help if specialists, and there are many people like that. There are very few pure specialists in, let's say, biology or physics, natural sciences. All right. There are more of them in social sciences, and of course, a lot of them in the humanities. But there's still plenty of people. We have lots of good colleagues in historians who have not only a deep knowledge of a very narrow field, but they also have a general interest. And these turn out to be some of the best colleagues that I have.
Your PhD is in biology, and your dissertation involved plant migration, if I understand that correctly.
Insect migration.
Insect migration, okay. Now you write history books. I'm curious, what drew you to the history of social cooperation, and especially to writing books on the subject for general audiences?
So I've been always more of a generalist than a specialist. Even when I was doing my PhD and then working later, I kept switching the field systems. And at some point, I wanted to have more challenge because I was studying population cycles, and it became clear to me that we started to see where the answers lie.
You were studying population cycles of insects or organisms?
Or generally organisms, insects, mammals, marine organisms. Again, as I said, I was a generalist from the very beginning. So So I was looking for a challenge, and it turned out that history was still not. My specialty is working at the interface between data and quantitative methods, modeling and analysis.
Okay.
And I did not see that happening in history in a systematic manner. So that was about 25 years ago. I decided to switch into this new field, really.
How did you get attracted to writing popular books on the subject?
Well, from the when I decided to go into what eventually developed into cliodynamics, I realized that when you do fairly novel things like this, you need both scientific rigor and you need also a way to explain what results are in more, popular, language. It turns out, actually, my first popular book, or trade book, as they're called, in the industry, was read primarily by other scientists.
Right.
But it turns out that it was a very good way for them to get into the field because you did not need to do as much work.
This was the dynamics of history?
No, it was War and Peace and War.
Oh, okay.
The historical dynamics was an academic book. It has a lot of equations and data tables, graphs, and so on and so forth. But War and Peace and War was written 3 years later, and it was also published by Penguin, by the way. And that has no equations in it or no graphs, just some maps. All right, and there is a lot of historical narrative there too. So so that it's easier writing, but it also deals with all the complex ideas and concepts. And so it turns out to be a good way to introduce not just a general public, but also scientists to the subject.
Sure, scientists who might not be as well acquainted with your specialization.
Or even scientists who actually understand modeling and analysis, but reading models and results of statistical analysis is more work than reading a historical narrative.
Right.
And so it is it's a good way to introduce a subject, but always pair popular writings with academic scientific writing, which doesn't pull punches and so forth. So now I'm just finishing the third book, because second book was called Outer Society. It's called Outer Society, that was published in 2016. And so this book I'm working on is going to be published next year. Okay,
I look forward to that one. I sort of categorize popular science authors into three categories. There are those that are specialists, books that are written by specialists in their fields. And this, for example, would be Stephen Hawking, or maybe Richard Dawkins writing about biology. And then there's a second category of authors who are academics, but they're writing kind of outside their narrow field. Jared Diamond would be a good example, or maybe Richard Dawkins writing about religion and philosophy. There are some authors who are not academics at all. Bill Bryson, James Gleick, Michael Shermer are a few examples. Some of these non-specialist authors are highly successful or influential. What advantages do you think a non-specialist could actually bring to writing a popular science book?
Oh, lots, of course, because, well, first of all, I don't fit any of those categories, because I write all my popular books are written on the subject that I intimately know from inside, and I can defend with, lots of data and quantitative methods. All right. So I'm not writing outside of my area of knowledge.
Okay.
But people who do that, I respect them a lot. James Gleick and several others. Gleick's book, for example, introduced me to the subject of chaos. There's nothing sacred about the scientific fields that we work on. I mean, some are harder. I mean, in order to understand, physics of elementary particles, you really need to learn some very complicated mathematical apparatus. But the types of stuff that cliodynamicists work on, the mathematics is well known. It's really like 30, 40 years old or something like that. And so it is not difficult for an interested lay person to learn all those ins and outs. And what they bring is that they bring their ability to connect with regular people. So now, because when I started writing popular books, I had to retrain myself, and I still need good editors. I need the good macro editors who will help me, because it's too easy for me to assume something that people will not understand, and so on and so forth. Because yes. I'm a geek. I'm too much of a geek, right? And I try, but I need some help. But those people who have become popular writers of very popular books, they're just good at that. All they need is to. So what they should do, they should talk, which they do, most of them. They should talk to specialists, and then so that they make sure that they understand things correctly. But then they can present the ideas in the vivid, interesting language and capture the reader's attention, and that's great.